Are you tired of having money in your bank account? Well, we have just the solution for you. A brand new car loan. For just $599 a month, you can join 22 million Americans who are about to fail on their car loan. Because nothing says financial freedom like a 7-year loan on a depreciating asset.
Now, if that sounded insane, you'd be correct. But thing is, people are clearly falling for it as car loans are now the second highest consumer debt right behind mortgages. But it gets worse. Just like they did with homes in 2008, Wall Street is packaging these car loans with thousands of others and selling that off to investors. So it's the exact same playbook and players, but this time it's jacking up car prices and your payments are funding the bubble. And the cracks are already showing, where the levels that people are failing on their car loans just surpassed Great Depression levels.
Monthly payments are skyrocketing, the highest on record.
Because even though defaulting on your mortgage and losing your house is definitely worse, defaulting on a car loan in America oftentimes means losing your ability to work, creating a domino where that cycle of debt delays you being able to buy a home, starting a family, or building any sort of real wealth. So the question is, how the hell did we get here with the car market? And most importantly, what happens when the bubble pops?
Highest since the recession in 2008 and 2009.
18% on their car? What?
Sadly, the American dream is dead.
Today, American car debt has reached an all-time high, and so has how much it costs to buy one. So how is Wall Street getting rich off your car debt, and why is it worrying? Well, they're using the same playbook that caused the 2008 financial crash. But to really understand how car debt has become a $150 billion industry, first we need to figure out how it all works. Well, the first thing that you need to understand is that banks hate money that just sits. Because let's say they give you $10,000 for your car. If it sits, they can't give that money to someone else. They have to wait years until you pay it all back. And this is where auto-backed securities come into play. Instead of your debt just collecting dust on the balance sheet, the banks will take your car loan, bundle it together with hundreds of other similar loans, then sell them to investors as securities. For banks, this is a win-win. They get their money back right away, and they push the risk of defaults onto investors. And the result? Banks and other lenders are incentivized to hand out more and more loans without caring if people can actually pay them back. And this all works because unlike houses, cars aren't considered like a groundbreaking, life-changing purchase, at least for Wall Street. It's sort of like student loans in the sense that basically everyone can get approved for a car loan to the point where you don't even have to show proof of income. Like, oh, you have sub 500 credit and you've been unemployed for the last 6 months? Yeah, for sure. Just sign right here and you can get your Hellcat with 35% interest. And so it's no surprise that these sorts of risky loans now make up 17% of financed car purchases. And surprise, surprise, repossessions and people failing on these loans have now rose to 15-year highs, surpassing the Great Depression levels. And it's exactly why the bubble is starting to form. Today, everyday Americans are over-leveraged on their cars, where the average auto loan balance for new cars is now at a record high $40,000. But where it gets worrying is if further financial stress like job losses, inflation, and especially if the used car market starts seeing a steep drop in used prices, where people can no longer save themselves from reselling their cars for high prices to pay off those loans, the rate of people failing on these loans could spike even further in mounting losses for investors. It's a similar course of financial engineering that led to the 2008 financial crash with housing of larger, longer, and riskier loans to riskier borrowers, but this time it's with depreciating assets and cars, which can obviously make it even more volatile. But with that said, unlike 2008 when auto defaults were mostly just a footnote to the mortgage crisis, now auto debt balances are much larger with car prices shooting up.
And models that are going for more than 100K.
But the sort of good news is that the share of these risky auto loans is still lower rates than what we saw in 2008. And thankfully, solid borrowers are actually doing just fine and not failing on their auto loans. So at least for now, this sort of risk of collapse is limited. Sort of. Because as tempting as it is to blame everything on Wall Street's moral bankruptcy, that's only a part of the story. Because the truth is, the debt trap runs much deeper. It's baked into the very design of America itself. And like I always say, if you want to make real money, you have to create a problem and then offer the solution. And to really understand the bubble that's forming today, you have to understand how America became a country designed for car ownership, or rather, car dependency. For the longest time, car ownership was advertised not only as a symbol of status, but of freedom.
Take a look at the new Ford for 1950. It's 50 ways new.
But it wasn't always like this. Believe it or not, the early 20th century, a number of American cities had similar infrastructure to that of European cities, with buses, trams, and cable cars. And with that, it also made it so grocery stores, schools, post offices, and other amenities were located within a walking distance from wherever you lived. But that slowly began to change around the middle of the last century, and it wasn't the free market economy that led to this. It was lobbying. Enter the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, a law that essentially locked the US into the modern serfdom.
In this century, America has become a nation on wheels.
Signed into law by President Dwight D. Eisenhower, it authorized the construction of 41,000 miles of interstate highways, the largest public works project in US history at the time, costing the taxpayers $25 billion to fund it. And interestingly, Eisenhower's thought process was actually inspired by Europe, the German Autobahn system, as he saw highways were essential for moving troops and supplies in case of war. So it came from good intentions, but like any other government project, it has some undesired consequences. As you can imagine, this was a massive construction project, which meant tearing down the existing infrastructure. If you live in America, you can see that highways often cut through entire city neighborhoods, often minority or low-income communities, completely demolishing homes and businesses. This was a massive construction project, which meant tearing down the existing infrastructure. To build these highways, this meant cutting through entire city neighborhoods, often minority or low-income communities, and completely demolishing homes and businesses. And building these highways meant neglecting or completely dismantling existing public transport in favor of car and oil lobbies. In the early 20th century, streetcars were actually everywhere in US cities, and they were cheap, frequent, and powered by electricity. But during the 40s and 50s, a group of companies like General Motors bought up the entire streetcar systems across dozens of US cities. They then ripped out the streetcars and replaced them with buses powered by, you guessed it, GM Motors. And in 1947, GM and its partners were actually indicted for conspiring to monopolize public transit. And in 1949, they received a massive fine of, wait for it, $5,000. And all the individual executives involved were fined $1 each. But that's not all. Even things like jaywalking was something automakers lobbied as early as the 20s to criminalize pedestrians, to normalize the idea that streets are for cars, not people. And as we're seeing the effects today, it was in the 80s and 90s when car loans became big finance, as car lobbyists pushed for longer terms, looser underwriting, and fewer disclosure rules to normalize debt to own cars. And today, car lobby groups like the Alliance for Automotive Innovation spend millions to lobby against stricter fuel efficiency and tax credits that keep this car demand artificially high, resulting in the huge parking lots in the sprawling suburbs like the one you and I most likely grew up in. So as you can clearly see through history, America was fundamentally changed to design everything with wheels in mind. And lobbies became more and more powerful over the decades to keep this system going and creating the bubble we see today. But now the car industry is facing a major challenge, because in order to keep this bubble going, car makers obviously need people to keep buying cars. But with rising prices and debt, people are simply not buying enough cars for their liking. So now car companies are pivoting to a new, almost dystopian business model that would have probably been considered insane just 10 years ago. But it might not be producing the effects that they were looking for. Historically, Americans were buying new cars every 5 years or so. The thing is, modern cars are actually much better and more durable than ever, so most people don't need or want to upgrade their ride as often. In fact, an average car on the US road today is almost 13 years old, the oldest that it's ever been. So these car makers are stuck between a rock and a hard place. They have to make durable quality cars to you can keep up with competition and people buy them, but this means fewer annual sales for their new cars. And so to make up that difference, one strategy that they came up with recently is to simply make fewer affordable cars in favor of expensive luxury models. And from a business perspective, that makes total sense. Obviously, expensive cars have better margins than their budget counterparts. But this only works to an extent because not everyone can afford a luxury car, so car notes are also having to pivot and taking notes from tech companies, and they're slowly shifting their business model even more. And so to make cars a never-ending moneymaker, they started introducing is subscription-based seat warmers. Yeah, I'm not even kidding. BMW introduced its functions on demand platform, allowing customers to activate features such as heated seats and advanced cruise control for a modest monthly fee of $18. Now, unsurprisingly, this led to deserved backlash, and the company quickly backpedaled and discontinued this service. But this doesn't mean that BMW or other car makers stopped exploring other subscription-based services. Tesla's premium connectivity package offers things such as satellite maps, live traffic visualization, and media streaming for a monthly fee. Toyota is charging $8 a month for features like navigation and remote start. And of course, you could argue that all these features are optional, and fair enough. But what's worrying about this is this never-ending subscription trend where things are just getting more expensive while you're getting less. So something like car ownership that was for years marketed as the sign of freedom is increasingly becoming a form of digital landlordism in a country where you literally need a car to do anything. And what's the most worrying is that young people are the most affected by this.
Nobody will even give me an interview.
I'm Caitlin, I'm a university graduate, and I applied to 647 roles before I got one.
Gen Z are already struggling with not being able to find jobs, and combine that with higher sticker prices, rising insurance, and steeper loan interest rates, and it's no wonder that auto loan delinquencies are highest amongst this population. While older, wealthier folks now account for an all-time high of nearly half of all new car purchases. So when we consider all this, you can start seeing why for a lot of people, their only solution becomes taking on more debt. And it's exactly how this environment keeps growing this bubble that's forming. But as everything continues to rise, so will the default rates. And this is where we really start seeing the outlines of a much bigger problem. Because just like you saw with 2008, when debt gets too heavy, it doesn't just hit individuals. It impacts everyone. And if things get worse, it threatens whether this can become the next domino that could tip the entire economy into crisis. So to return to the question, will this happen? In 2023, over 20% of new car loans had monthly payments of over $1,000. And that's during a time where most Americans today can't even afford a $1,000 emergency expense without taking on additional debt. But here's exactly how it becomes a systemic issue. When money is tight, auto loans are one of the first debts that people start failing on. And today, the number of delinquencies is rising. So when people start missing their car payments, they're also likely falling behind on other bills. They're cutting back on restaurants, shopping, and vacations. And it's exactly what we started seeing in similar spikes during 2008 and 2020 during the pandemic. And I'm not sure if you know this, but consumer spending literally holds the American economy up. It makes 2/3 of the US economy.
Consumer spending accounts for nearly 70% of economic activity in the United States.
So if consumption really starts getting impacted, it's easy to see how this all impacts the economy at large. And if it really gets bad to a point where literally no one is buying cars, what happens? Well, there's good and bad news depending on what side you're on. Just like we saw in 2008, if the market crashes, regulators can step in to rescue US car companies. And that's exactly what happened. The Federal Reserve stepped in, securing an $80 billion bailout to keep these companies afloat. And the reasoning was simple. Letting these companies fail would lead to the loss of 3 million jobs, which would be even more devastating to the economy. But what this precedent created that we're still seeing today is that these safety nets change incentives to reward risky behavior. Put it this way. Let's say you go to a casino and play any game you wanted. Craps, roulette, slots, blackjack, you take your pick. And if you win, you get to keep it. But let's say if you lose, the owner of the casino will make it up to you. So if that's the incentive structure at play, what would you do? What you would do is to make as many bets on the riskiest games possible, like a roulette wheel, and you'll do it without thought so you can get the biggest potential upside. And that's exactly the dynamic that we're seeing at play with the big three Detroit car companies, GM, Ford, and Chrysler. It's an environment that allows them to take risky strategies like raising prices and implementing subscriptions, because if it pays off, shareholders win, but even if it all blows up, they'll still get a bailout. Because in a country where people need cars to do anything, just like the banks, these car companies are deemed too big to fail. And if it all goes crashing down, you're gonna be the one that's forced to save them with your tax dollars. So with that, am I saying that car debt is going to cause a 2008 level recession? No. Car loans are a massive industry, but in terms of the asset sides, it's nothing compared to the real estate market. But as prices keep rising and car delinquencies rise, it is a signal that households are stretched to the breaking point in a country where you need a car. But there is a silver lining. For decades, we've been sold the story of cars being an essential part of the American dream. But that dream is dying, and more young people are waking up to the reality. For many, car ownership isn't freedom anymore. But freedom is being redefined as being able to live in a walkable neighborhood with everything steps away, or just opting out of car culture entirely. But as it stands now, that's a luxury for a select few. And I know because I don't have a car. I have a job where I can do from anywhere and live in a neighborhood where I can walk anywhere. And seriously, it's thanks to all your guys' support. Anyways, hopefully that didn't sound like I was bragging, but if you want me to go even deeper into this topic, I will be writing about it next week in my free weekly newsletter in the video description. And if you haven't seen my last video on how everything we buy today feels like a gamble, then go and watch this video next on how gambling predicts the next recession, and like this video. Thanks.